All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Hey, Facebook. Hey, Russell community. Hey, welcome to the Summer Learning Series for RPOP. What is a community land trust? We have our guests with us today. We have our community here with us today, and we're going to get started with our conversation around community land trust. What does that look like? What is it, and how can we potentially organize and implement a community land trust in the Russell community? My name is Maya White. I am the Senior Associate of Innovation and Research with Cities United, and we are the incubating partner with the local metro government for Russell Place of Promise. Just before we get started, just want to go over a few things about just, encouraging everybody to be involved with this conversation. This is very much a conversation that we're doing, learning with each other. So please just use the comment section for any questions that you may have, any comments or anything that you want to share around the conversation. If you have any questions about RPOP or anything, we have our staff outreach team and our director Cassandra Rebb that's going to be supporting you all there. So there'll be links being dropped in the comment section, not the chat box, the comment section, and all that information to keep us held together in understanding what's going on today. Another reminder that this is a safe space. This is a brave space. So we want to honor everybody, honor their voices, honor the input that they have. So just keeping that as a reminder as we're going through the next hour and a half with each other, that to keep this a safe and a brave space for everybody to learn with each other. Okay, let's get into it. So this is our agenda. We already did our welcome. I introduced myself. I'm Maya, and Cassandra Webb will be in the comment section giving information. Also, you may see some names familiar like Daphne, Christian, Jackie, or Nia, and those are the outreach team, and they'll support you all in the chat box as well. We'll do some intros and appreciation. We will have some remarks from a Russell resident, Mr. Markham French. We will go through some CLT history and a quick video from Grounded Network Solutions, and then we'll have our conversation with our panelists, and then we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll kind of wrap up, give some information about a follow-up event for this summer learning series around community land trust, and then we will take it on home. We'll close it out. And just know if you ever have to walk away from this conversation, you think you're gonna miss something, we always have our recordings on YouTube and also later on our page, so you can always refer back. So don't feel pressured to stay in your seat, do what you need to do. The video will be around. So if you don't know who Russell Place of Promise is, also known as RPOP, we are a justice-based initiative focused on generating investments in the people and places that make Russell special. As I said earlier, we are incubated by Cities United and local metro government, and we're just like this initiative that holds a very special place in Russell. Our vision is to build Black wealth through investment without displacement. And we have a lot of principles that mean dear to us that we're working through with our residents. And one of those is community learning. And what community learning, what we mean by that is just making space for innovative thinking and shared learning together, doing that in a space where we feel safe to share that information. So for the summer learning series, we will have multiple conversations from June to August, and we wanted to create a foundation. One of those foundations tools will be Sankofa. If you're familiar with the icon principle, it's an African principle from the people of Ghana. It means to turn back and go back to your roots. So you see that bird going back and fetching that egg from the back of his body. He's flying. The bird is going back to the past, right? Going back into history to retrieve and see what it looks like in the future, what is willing to be done in the present and the future. And so that is where Sankofa comes from. And that is a foundation for us today. So we will look over history, we will have that grounded knowledge for us to go back to be able to have the conversations we're having today. Community learning is a foundation. So we just want to make sure we're making space to be innovative and to build knowledge with each other, innovative thinking, thinking about non-traditional things, new things, scary things that could potentially, uplift us and bring us to a brighter day. And as a community, keep this in mind in this space that we will explore different layers of learning. This looks like we don't always have to read and write to learn, right? We can play to learn. We can enjoy space together. We can eat together and learn. We can do so many different ways of, building knowledge. So just keeping in mind the different ways of learning. You don't have to do it one way. We can do it multiple ways. Another way we're going to be in community is we will take risk in learning. So it's picking up the things that we want to be more curious about, asking more questions, doing things that we're not familiar with, but has a lot of potential. And then be creative in learning. So that's just thinking of all the ways we can just have fun and make sure that we're being very innovative and thought-provoking when we're thinking about the new things that we're going to be talking about today and in the future. And then the most important part is to do it, right? We can talk, we can play, we can enjoy, we can read, all the things, but we have to actually do it. So just keeping those things in mind as we go through this series, but especially today, since this is our first one. And how we can be very active today in this conversation is that you can drop your questions and your comments in the chat box. I keep saying chat box, but I mean the comment section. So when I say chat box, no, I'm talking about comment section, okay? Just add your comments and your questions there, okay? And we will get to those at the end of the session. And this is just a thank you to everybody who's on the panelists, everybody who supported us in this endeavor today. Grounded Solutions Network, they're here. Thank you for coming into this space and having conversations with us, having conversations with Rebound and Center for Neighborhoods, and building that relationship with Louisville. Thank you, Center for Neighborhoods, for doing that work and doing the work that you always do. Thank you, Rebound, for always just being a support system for housing and for the people of Russell and the people of Louisville. Lexington Community Land Trust, a new friend of ours. Thank you for being here. And of course, thank you to Cities United, our home place, and also Louisville Metro Government. And our neighbors too, like Mr. Markham and everybody in R4R and in the Russell community. Thank you for making this space happen and believing in us. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it over to Mr. Markham French. He is a Russell resident and RPOP R4R member. R4R is Russell for Russell. It is a group of people who came together starting in October and for consistently every week during the pandemic for 16 weeks, we had people from the age of 22 to 70 years old who came together we learned everything from network tools, generational Black wealth building, everything. Some of the things you've seen in the virtual library, if you're familiar with us, we learned about it. Even the economic models that we're learning about today, cooperatives, universal basic income, community land trust, we had those conversations with our group. And so we just wanna have Mr. Markham share some things with us today. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second, and Mr. Markham's gonna unmute himself and share his spiel.
Thank you for the unmute reminder. I became reintroduced to Russell back in 2004. Now, prior to that, when I was little, my grandmother worked at a beauty shop in Russell. We used to play in Western Cemetery as kids. So I was familiar vaguely with Russell as a child, but got reintroduced in 2004 when I came back to Louisville from Memphis, Tennessee. And eventually I became the executive director of Plymouth Community Renewal Center. And that's when my eyes were really open to what I consider one of the most wonderful neighborhoods in this community. We had a food pantry, and you would just see the community, people intermingling and talking and helping each other out with the food pantry. We had youth programs and children's programs, and parents were really actively involved, and kids from the neighborhood were actively involved in the community center. Also, because I had to write grants, I had to learn the history of Russell, and that even fascinated me more because it has such a rich history for an African-American community. I even did a lot of research about Western Cemetery, which I found absolutely fascinating as well. Um, when Plymouth closed down a couple of years ago, I became less engaged in the Russell community, even though in 2008, I finished building my house in Russell in the Cedar Street project. Um, love my house, love the Cedar Street project, but I wasn't engaged in the Russell community like I was when I was the executive director at Plymouth. But thanks to RPOP and being a part of that group, I started the process of being re-engaged in the Russell community, particularly what the future of Russell community is going to look like and how that's going to benefit the people that live and work and play in the Russell community. As a sidebar, also, I work for Louisville Metro Housing Authority, and I've had the opportunity to provide social services to the residents who were removed from Beecher Terrace when they demolished it, and I'm working with residents as they move back into Beecher Terrace. So I do appreciate the work of RPOP. I appreciate the opportunity to get re-engaged in the work of Russell. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Mr. Marco, and thank you for the work that you've done and the engagement and the involvement that you have in Russell. We appreciate you. Okay, share my screen again. So going into the conversation about COTs and bringing in that Sankofa effect, we want to share just a brief history of COTs, which I think is very important and has came up in a lot of conversations with some of the panelists that we've had before our event here. So community land trusts are rooted in Black economic in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement we know that has happened in the 60s. There was a big movement that happened in Albany, Georgia in the 60s, and that was very involved with, the prominent figures that we know, Martin Luther King, and even some of his relatives, C.B. King and Slater King. And the first CLT that is known to appear in Albany, Georgia, in Albany, Georgia, in 1969. And this was pretty much in effect after, a sweeping of white landowners displacing and evicting Black sharecroppers from land due to, Black folks really coming in, protesting segregation in the South and in Albany. And they were doing that to protect their voting rights or to, establish and exercise that they did have voting rights. And so in that fight, the ideas, the movement, the organization of a land trust began. And so the 1960s Albany civil rights movements and organizing really wanted to secure economical advancement for Black people in Albany, Georgia. And the movement leaders that were really a part of this were Slater King. Slater King was a real estate broker working in Albany, Georgia. There was C.B. King, who was an attorney and one of few attorneys in the South. There was SNCC leader, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee leader, who was Charles Sherrod and Shirley Sherrod, who was his wife, and then Bob Swan, who was he was like a national housing program manager. He was very known in the housing market. These individuals went to study in Israel. They came back with a model that is historically foundational to the CLTs that we know as the first one, which is the New Communities Incorporated. So just in these pictures, this is C.B. King here, the attorney. Slater King is in this picture with Bob Swan. This is Marion King, and this is another young woman who went to Israel. This is Charles, the SNCC leader, and this is Carl Braden, really known in Louisville for addressing housing discrimination in Louisville. So in that work, in that organization, with the founders of New Communities Incorporated, they created a collective resolution for economic security through land ownership for Black farmers in 1969. And that was with the New Communities Incorporated. And understanding this information, right, understanding this history is just so potent to me because it allows me to know how CLTs are rooted. And so in those bullets, you see CLTs are rooted in communities and organizers seeking economic freedom, right? We know that the pursuit of having land is important in these states. What does that look like when the community owns that land? Communities securing housing, land, and food access. That's a trend that's happening in understanding how to reach a state of liberty. It's to secure housing, to secure land, to secure food access. And that's one of the many ways we can, get to a pursuit of liberation. So what does that look like when communities do that together? And then CLTs are also rooted in communal power and communal wealth. Communal power equals communal wealth, right? What does that look like? When those things equalize each other, what does that feel like? And a CLT can bring that about depending on how it's modeled, how it's organized, how it's rooted in community. Right now, we know that there are 275 CLTs in America. So this is something we have done. This is something that we're doing, and this is something that can be done again and again. It can be really special to our community itself. So I just wanted to lay that foundation of where CLTs are from. So we're going to watch a 1.5-minute video about what are CLTs. This is from Grounded Network Solutions, a very great video I like. We're going to watch this, and then we're going to get in our conversation.
Community Land Trusts, or CLTs, are nonprofit organizations that acquire, own, and steward land permanently for the common good. The most common CLT land use is housing, but retail, office, and a variety of other uses are possible. CLTs give formal decision-making voice and power to local community residents in determining land uses. Here's how CLTs make home buying affordable for families in their communities. First, the CLT builds or buys homes using one-time public or private investment. Next, the CLT sells just the home to a low-income buyer who qualifies for a mortgage, and the CLT keeps the land, holding it in trust for future generations of home buyers. In return for being able to buy a home at a discounted price, the family agrees to pay it forward and sell to another low-income family at a price they can afford. The CLT manages the sales process, ensuring that each home-buying family builds some wealth from a predetermined, limited amount of the sales proceeds. In this way, the one-time public or private investment in CLT homes makes lasting affordability a reality and stabilizes communities. And CLTs benefit the larger community too, as they preserve and protect housing for long-term residents, helping to build stronger, safer, and higher quality diverse neighborhoods, contributing to greater educational attainment, employment opportunities, and health outcomes. Visit groundedsolutions.org to learn more about CLTs today.
Awesome. Okay, we'll make sure you all get that link in our virtual library. So we're going to go into our conversation. I'm going to introduce our panelists that we have with us here today. I'm going to start off by introducing Michael Forbush. Michael Forbush is the Education and Engagement Director of Center for Neighborhoods. Michael leads the Neighborhood Liaison Engagement Program and all educational programs for the Center for Neighborhoods. He is a native Louisvillian and a graduate of the University of Louisville. Previously, he was the Senior Program Coordinator with Muhammad Ali Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of Louisville. We welcome Michael into this conversation. Then we have Jason Webb. Jason Webb is with Grounded Solutions Network, drawing over 25 years experience in the community organizing and revitalization, specializing in housing in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Jason oversees membership strategy and capacity building of startup groups. Before coming to Grounded Solutions, Jason worked 15 years for Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and network member Dudley Members Incorporated, DNI, serving in several capacities as a director of real estate and technology, director of the DNI, the Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the Community Land Trust, the director of administration and finance. He oversaw the development of several community land trust developments and created a youth jobs program called Communityscapes. Welcome, Jason. And next we have Justin Kirchner. He's the Director of Home Ownership with Lexington Community Land Trust. Justin started the Community Land Trust in Lexington. He started with the Lexington Community Land Trust in January of 2017. He graduated with a master's in public administration from Murray State University with a concentration in nonprofit leadership. He wrote his master's thesis on the root causes of residential property abandonment in Lexington and the disparate outcomes related to vacant and abandoned homes. And then we have Kevin Dunlap as Executive Director of Rebound Incorporated. Kevin Dunlap currently serves as the Executive Director of Rebound, a separate nonprofit housing development corporation created by the Louisville Urban League in 1993. He has previously served as Senior Deputy Director for Fannie Mae Kentucky office, Relationship Manager for NeighborWorks America, and Senior Housing Director for the Louisville Urban League. His expertise in the areas of housing, community development, and banking has spanned nearly 30 years. Welcome, Kevin. And then who will be co-facilitating this conversation with our panelists is Mr. Markham French. He has done work at Plymouth Community Center in Russell Community, and also he is a Russell member. So we're going to welcome him as well as he helps moderate this conversation. I'll quit sharing the screen and then we will have everybody's faces for us to see. Hey, y'all.
Hey.
All right. We're going to get started. How y'all feeling today? Y'all good?
Yeah.
Great.
All right. So we have some time, so we can go a little bit over what we planned. We'll start off with the first question. Mr. Markham, do you want to start off with our first question?
Yes, it goes, explain the community land trust model and the different structures of community land trusts. How do they maintain affordable housing?
That's a Jason question. I don't know why he's hesitating.
I'm actually waiting for Justin because, he's actually on the ground sort of doing this. But, just as the video sort of talked about, the community land trust sort of model is sort of a vehicle where it is a nonprofit organization that has some very distinct elements to it. One is the fact that the board of directors is a very unique board that tries to balance the needs of the community. So it brings together residents of the community. It also brings together those individuals that are going to be leasing land on that land trust to that board of directors, and then leave space for technical experts to also be a part of that board. Now, the important thing about this organization is that it's a membership-based organization, and the membership comes from the community in which it serves. So this board of directors gets to be elected by those members. And if for a community land trust, those are usually the residents in the community. If we're talking about Russell, it would be sort of the residents of Russell coming together and electing that board of directors and, moving the organization forward. But again, this organization has the certain pillars of being community owned through its membership and being community controlled, because that membership actually dictates who gets to be on that board of directors. And unfortunately, if you're not living up to snuff, it's also the community that's going to come in and say, well, we're not going to vote you back on for another term. It's a true part of what we would consider to be, democracy. It's sort of democracy in its truest form in a community, really taking control of itself. So of a community land trust, that's the organization. Now, what the organization does is it acquires land, it acquires property, and it uses what I like to call the checkbook of the city to make those public investments that are necessary. And what the organization does is it separates the improvements from the land. Now, some folks would be like, well, wait a minute, Jason, I'm not going to own my own land. We'll get to that. But one of the things that's important about this separation is that the land itself is what the community will control to make it so that this housing stays permanently affordable, or this farm stays a farm for whatever term that the community deems fit, or that commercial space stays affordable and it has the right tenants that the community wants. Anything that you can do on real estate, you can put into a community land trust, because again, it's about the decision-making authority. It's about allowing residents those seats around the table and telling them, go and sit there and we're going to have you be the decision makers on what should best happen in your own community. So that, to me, is what a community land trust is creating in terms of its controlling pieces, and then what it does. It primarily separates that land ownership so that the housing or whatever that use is permanent for the community.
Yeah, and to go a little bit farther with that conversation about affordability and permanent affordability, so as a community land trust, we're there to really implement those decisions made by the community itself. It's a truly democratic and way to really reverse the development narrative that has been external to so many communities for, as long as development has been a part of our national narrative. And so with the permanent affordability of the community land trust model, what you typically see, and this is where every community finds different priorities. Every community looks at this a little bit differently and can tailor it to their residents. But with the permanent affordability of a community land trust, you generally see a land lease being implemented that allows that individual to utilize the land as if it was their own. That land is still being held as that community asset. And that way, there are certain stipulations in that land lease that, look at the house as a community asset where that individual has the ability to purchase that home at an incredibly affordable rate. As Jason mentioned, oftentimes due to subsidies from the city, the federal government, et cetera. So that individual benefits greatly from those initial subsidies. And then what we're saying is, the next buyer paying that subsidy forward and keeping that subsidy in the home. We call that subsidy retention. And so that way, that individual home can remain permanently affordable owner after owner after owner. And through that, the individual, the first owner, is building wealth through the equity in the house, but then also gaining some appreciation in the house. Typically what you see in a land lease resale formula is limiting the appreciation. So allowing it to go up in price, just disconnecting it from the market so that, when 2020 happens and home prices double within, the course of a year, those individual homes in the community land trust will remain accessible and remain affordable to low to moderate income families in perpetuity, while still allowing the families to build wealth, but also allowing that community to retain that asset. And so really, we look at it as a way to balance the needs of the individual, which is to build that incredibly important intergenerational wealth that we know was denied, especially to Black and Brown communities for decades upon decades due to redlining and the like. And so building intergenerational wealth, but then also building community wealth. To connect really what Jason was saying to Maya, that community power that comes from the membership and the board of directors that translates directly into community wealth with the community land trust model, since that home is being held as an asset for that community in perpetuity.
Yeah, and then just to pick up where Justin left off, now that you own the home, again, the community land trust is there to help support you in being the best homeowner that you can be. In some ways, community land trusts are also a safety net, just in case if you fall upon hard times, you can go to a community land trust and be like, hey, I lost my job, or I'm in transition. I still need to keep my house. What can we do? And you have a permanent partner in the community land trust to say to you as a homeowner, we got your back. Don't worry, we're going to figure this out. And this is why we're here, is to make sure this idea of development without displacement is something that can be actually implemented, because you can actually not displace these homeowners and unfortunately go through the traditional route of, well, if you lose your house, you lose your house. I'm sorry, that's your fault. With a community land trust, it's like, no. Losing a house is not necessarily even an option. We will borrow, we will try to figure out different funders to come together to make sure that, again, homeowners stay in their homes because of this communal wealth and this communal power that we know comes in numbers. So the other thing that the Community Land Trust will do is continue to empower and to enrich the family. A number of community land trusts look at their homeowners as an extension of the family. And one of the things that is not surprising, that MLK's cousins were a part of the initial creation of this model, is this idea of a beloved community, of a community that can actually lean on each other, that can celebrate with each other, and also lift up each other in different times. And that's sort of some of the values and some of the ways that the community land trusts actually operate.
Thank you for pulling all of those strings tied together, the board of directors, how it's made up, what it looks like financially, and also what that looks like on a cultural, social sense of how we're building community with each other. That goes like perfectly into our next question, which is, how are residents, CLT homeowners, the surrounding community members, how are these residents organizing and leading in their leadership? How are they organizing in their leadership, being included in the development, in the implementation and management of the CLTs? So, I mean, from the very beginning stages to the actual implementation of what it is. And I know this will be a great question for Michael and for Kevin, also for Justin, for everybody, honestly, but to hear a little bit from Michael and Kevin, what does that look like?
So let me say that our plan for crafting this CLT really depends on the residents, the leadership, those organizing, those working and living in Russell, to come together and to be the CLT. Without the residents actually living in Russell now, there would be no CLT, right? So it takes the people living in the neighborhood to come together, both those that are really, really engaged and voices are heard all the time, and those that are rarely engaged, to sit down and craft this organization to be able to lead into the future, right? One of the best things for me around a CLT is community controlled development. You have residents that will be able to look out into their neighborhood and decide on what development is going to happen in their neighborhood. Having a CLT, especially in this city, is going to, one, create a collective power, but it'll also create both political and social power, because these residents who are living in this neighborhood are not only have a collective voice, but they have land and funding behind them. So they'll have direct influence into what goes into their neighborhood, and they will also have a lot more influence as well as what goes on in the city.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it is, having that much power in so many steps of the development process. Here in Lexington, we just went through a neighborhood development planning process with our community, which is a 20-acre area very close to downtown Lexington that's in this community land trust. And throughout that 1.5 year long process, obviously it was not only run by the residents themselves, but the decision-making power was truly given over to the residents. We as a staff use a phrase that we learned from a CLT out in St. Louis, which is ask, align, and act. We're not there to walk into the room and say, as a staff member, this is what I think should happen. We're there to listen and actually implement the plans and ideas of the community itself. And so not only through the board, that tripartite board that Jason was talking about, where 1/3 of the board of directors are residents, the processes laid out in the bylaws of community land trusts are inherently shifting that power dynamic to the residents themselves, where conversations about land sales, conversations about commercial development, all have to be voted on by the residents. So we were able to put together a neighborhood development plan through this long refresh process where, this 5-acre city park that's going into the neighborhood, they were able to work with Parks and Recreation and design a city park where we have 5 acres of commercial space. We were able to prioritize and create a go, no-go list for what commercial assets would best create that communal wealth and respond to the needs of the community. And so we were able to really implement the hopes and dreams of the neighborhood with some MOUs that are coming public here very shortly. And so that way, we're really looking at it from the perspective of staff is there to implement those processes that the neighborhood, the residents, and the board of directors really decide on. And we've actually amended our bylaws a little bit to be even more inclusionary of resident voices. We made sure to carve out a spot on our executive committee where even if one of the residents isn't in one of those elected positions on the executive committee, the board president, vice president, et cetera, we were sure to say that there has to be a permanent seat on our executive committee so that every single step along the decision-making process, resident input is heard, listened to, and acted upon.
I'm curious, Mr. Markham, do you have what would you imagine your participation in building a CLT would look like?
Well, one of the ultimate benefits of CLT is this, is that in the past, when Black and brown communities have started to develop and become successful and independent, forces outside of those communities were able to topple that. Well, with the CLT, they're unable to do that because the true power actually lies within the community. I love the idea, yes, bringing the expertise that the community needs to realize the ultimate CLT, but also the most important component of it is the involvement of the community. And just one more note, when you have outside entities, expertise, and they begin to get skin in the game, there's no way they're going to let outside forces come in and destroy the work that they've been able to create with the help of the community.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and I would say that without the community, then you just have a land trust. our founders were very explicit when they debated what should this be called. And they put community in the beginning. They basically said, you got to start with the community. If you don't have the community, this cannot be something, and because Grounded Solutions works on a national level, I've had groups be like, hey, can Grounded Solutions just come in and just create a CLT? And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. The residents have to create this. We're glorified facilitators that are going to help facilitate this process and sort of bring some of, the options to the table and say, this has worked, this hasn't worked. You want to stay away from that because that's going to just lead you into trouble. And sort of help with sort of the residents to make sure that this is a success. Because one of the things that I say a lot, and I've been doing this for now over 30 years, every CLT is interconnected with each other. Because in the same way that you talk about outside forces trying to topple communities that are trying to lift up themselves, we also have outside forces that are trying to take this CLT over as well. Because they understand that, hey, there's a model, there's a tool that communities that have historically been left out of the process can now be used to turn the tables and actually start to do their own processes and control what their destiny is, that is also going against the systems that are out there that have historically made these communities the way they are today.
And Mike, I just want to interject one more thing. If Russell CLT was able to acquire a large enough parcel of land and a retail store wanted to build upon that land, and we would have actually a retail store in Russell, then it would be the residents of Russell, the members of the CLT, that will make the decision which retail store to build there, and not forces from outside the community because of personal political views that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You don't have to have another Family Dollar if you don't want another Family Dollar.
That's right. We felt that one. Kevin, can you explain your Rebound Housing Development Corporation? You've been researching, you're doing this work, you're bringing this foundation to Louisville. Can you explain what are some city and state policies and practices that may have impacted the ability to start the CLT? Or start the research in the process of it?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing was just will. I think, municipalities, government have to have the will to, first of all, want to even think about or entertain this. But I'm not going to put it all on them because you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't research and you are not aware of community land trust, you don't know anything about them. I think for me and for Rebound, what makes this so intriguing for us is that Rebound has historically worked in African-American neighborhoods. We got our start working in the Russell neighborhood. So, my whole goal was creating Black home ownership. My goal is for every African-American to own their own home, to own their own land. The only thing that is not multiplying in this country, in this world, is land. There's only a certain amount of it, and once it's gone, it's gone. So that's what really interests me, about the community land trust model, is that the community itself actually has control of it. So I've been watching, what has been taking place throughout Louisville probably for the last 20 years, going all the way back to when the Housing Authority did their first Hope 6 project. And as I began to see each of these major projects happen all across the city, I noticed how those neighborhoods look like they begin to change. Outside forces begin to start coming in and buying property. Now, all of a sudden, that don't look like the neighborhood that it used to look like. And these neighborhoods were primarily African-American neighborhoods. So let's move up to the last 5 years, and I began to see the same changes starting to take place in two particular neighborhoods, the Smoketown neighborhood and the Russell neighborhood. The thing that has taken place in both of those is major investments coming or are taking place. And then all of a sudden, you see this influx of people coming in and buying up property and property values going up. And so that's what really put in my mind that we really do need a community land trust here in this city. So I've received a lot of flack, just to be perfectly honest, ever since the RFP was put out by the city on last year. Rebound applied for it and received the funding that was made available. So everybody's saying, Rebound is, trying to take over. Rebound is got all this money and they're going to do all of this development. Rebound. And, I really do want to set the record straight to anyone that's listening. I saw it as an opportunity to get some resources to facilitate this conversation. I think you've heard from everybody sitting here that the true form of a community land trust is governed, held, and ran by the people in those communities, not by organizations such as Rebound. So when the opportunity presented itself, yes, I looked at it. I was being greedy. I went after the whole pot of money. And I'm glad that I did, because what I found out was that there was no other applicants. Nobody else applied but me. So to me, that's, do we grab the money and make it work for us, or do we just not? Because I don't know if anybody has been following the budget cycle of the city for the last few years. Any trickle of money, everybody's fighting over. Everybody's grabbing it. It's going to every other place besides where the people want the money to go. So my goal was to get the money, facilitate these conversations, and get a community land trust started. Any funding that is collected during this time period, I'm holding it, and I'm transferring it right to the COT. So, I hope don't anybody listening, I hope everyone that's listening, realize that, this really is an effort to create something by the people in the communities for themselves, and we're just that vehicle to try to help make that happen. So maybe I said too much, Maya, but
this is a community. We in community, we sharing what we need to share. This Jason and Justin just, support us in this conversation. And thank you for explaining that. And Michael, can you share what Center for Neighborhoods, how you all are involved in the process of engaging community and being a part of that?
Yeah, so essentially, our role in this is to work in the community to get the word out, to knock on doors, to hand out flyers, to at some point do more informational sessions like this, to get people both excited, interested, and involved in creating the CLT, right? That's our whole objective in this, is to create that group of individuals that is going to take this CLT and move it forward. So once we get that group together, they will be the core that will do the rest of the work. So they'll decide on who those technical advisors are going to be. They'll decide on both housing and land use. And our role is pretty much over at that point, unless they ask us to give them more, right? So unless they say, hey, we need either organizational development, leadership, or we need to know about these specific things that you all do, If they don't need that, then our role is over. We will always have an interest and always check in. But once the group is formed and moves forward, we are pretty much, cheering from the sidelines.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maya, can I add just one other thing about the community land trust model?
Uh-huh.
And something else that I think is vitally important, and I think as generational wealth, and it was alluded to earlier in the conversation, how this is a mechanism for doing that. And particularly in these neighborhoods that we've described, these neighborhoods that we're working in right now, which are historically African-American. I think that this, we have been talking probably over the last year now, since the death of Breonna Taylor, about certain neighborhoods being, gentrified and this, that, and the other. This is, to me, is just one tool that can be used that can begin to turn the tides around, where we begin to create generational wealth, not only right now, but going forward. It's just one tool that we as African Americans and potentially new homeowners can use. One of the things that I started doing, and I've encouraged other developers to do, is every time I sell a house now, and just so that everybody know, I recently just sold 3 houses in Russell within the last 3 weeks, but that's a whole nother story, to African Americans. So we require at the end of our closings, everybody gets a will done. A will, a simple will. In this city, at one point, we had over 12,000 vacant and abandoned properties. A lot of those properties remained that way because we couldn't find the owners, or they didn't have a will. They had heirs. They were fighting. They didn't get along. So properties remained tied up in neighborhoods. And they were historically African-American neighborhoods where they were vacant, abandoned, and tied up because a will wasn't in place. So, there are tools that we can use now to start putting in place to help generational wealth happen in perpetuity. And I just look at the community land trust as being one of those pieces. And that's just only on the housing side. But a community land trust being used on the business side as well. So I think that, we have an opportunity to really open our minds up and think broadly about how we create and sustain wealth for ourselves in our communities that we lived in, have grown up in for a period of time.
Thank you for sharing that. That was going into the next question. What seems most beneficial for historically Black neighborhoods? That more than often the narrative and the reality is they're disinvested. And this can be for everybody, especially in Lexington, Davis Bottom. Lexington Community Land Trust is, I don't think it's historically Black, but it has some historical roots and Black people coming through kind of migration and finding labor and settling in Davis Bottom. So that's some background about Lexington. But anybody can pick in and say, what can seem beneficial for a community land trust to be planted in a historically Black neighborhood like Russell.
Yeah, and for Lexington, with Davis Bottoms, it was really the residents that began to drive this conversation about the CLT model. For a little bit of background, Lexington Community Land Trust was founded as the social justice mitigation tool for a road project. As we know, federal highways, state highways have a long history of displacing Black and brown communities, and therefore cutting off that intergenerational wealth accumulation. And so this road project was planned for decades. Since the 1930s, the Newtown Pike extension was planned. And so when it finally was implemented in the 2000s, after years of community deterioration, because landlords in the city disinvested from the community thinking about this road project in the future, the land trust was formed because the community fought back against this road project. They fought back and said, if you're going to build this road, we're going to build our wealth. And so, it was found through a Google search. community members and attorneys were Googling, what can we do to fight this and create an anti-displacement tool? And that's one of the things that a community land trust can be used for. It was mentioned earlier, a CLT has a number of different uses, and that's really its beauty, is it can be an anti-gentrification tool. It can be an anti-displacement, whether physical, economic, social, cultural displacement. A community land trust can be an economic development driver. So there's just so many different ways that the CLT can be used. And especially when it's harnessed by the community itself, as it was in Davis Bottom. And then they, became a partner in the Newtown Pike Extension project to gain state and federal funding for this housing development. So first of its kind community land trust partnership with a highway department to create an anti-displacement tool to fund the actual physical infrastructure and development of a neighborhood, as well as continue its thriving economic development through commercial spaces that respond to the needs of the residents. So there's just so many possibilities out there in terms of what is possible with the CLT, and it really can be adapted to meet the individual needs of the community.
But Jason, the beauty of what you said was that decision of what the community land trust is going to be is made by the people.
Yep.
So it's not made by organizations like Breathe Down. It is actually made by the people that make those type of decisions. And I always want to hammer that in that that's where the decisions are made.
Yeah, and I think that is that I would say is one of the single most important elements of this, is that, again, you're giving power back to individuals that have historically been marginalized and have been cut out of the processes of how their communities actually get developed. And you're literally giving them a tool and saying, no, now you're in charge. You get to make these decisions. You actually live here, work here. You are the best equipped to know exactly what should happen in your community. Instead of, the folks from downtown, in their little cubicles, as I call them, the bureaucrats, and I say that all lovingly, basically looking at maps and trying to figure out, oh yeah, I think we can put 20 units here, without sort of even going into those areas, that you're literally taking that away and saying, no, you as residents know what's best. You also know some intelligence about the community that others would probably pay a lot of money to just find out. Like, you would know, because you live there, if it's raining and if you got a vacant lot that's always, puddling and flooding. Anybody would, as a developer, would love to get that information before they go ahead and do that development. Kevin would love to know from a resident, hey, we may want to do some more site prep and build this land up because it puddles when it rains, versus, Kevin's, general contractor calling him after a rainstorm being like, hey, yeah, the basement flooded. Yeah, we're going to have to figure something else out. These are things that, again, because of the power of the collective of residents in a community, that they can actually start to actually put certain criteria on not just their development, but other development that comes into their community, and really build something that a number of other CLTs throughout the country have been able to build. Like my own personal story of Dudley Street. In Dudley Street, if a private developer tries to walk into our community and says, hey, I own this land free and clear, I'm going to go to the city and I'm going to deal with the city to do this development. because of the power that the community land trust at Dudley Street has gained over its 35 years, the city of Boston says to that developer, we can't touch this until you talk to the community and get their support. That's the type of power that I'm thinking about. That's the type of power that I look at community land trust, and I see a number of community land trusts that can position themselves to say to the city, you don't cut deals in our community. Bring them to us. Allow us to evaluate whether they're good or not. In you know, the idea of a grocery store. We know what we need here. We know what we can buy. Don't try to get Whole Foods to come in here because we can't afford that stuff. At the same time, you also have community land trusts that have seen huge success in giving a lot of credit to their city. So for example, the Houston Community Land Trust, you know, they were successful in making their city look good, and their mayor look good, and their housing director look good. The mayor and the housing director went to bat and brought $55 million more dollars to that community land trust. That's going to be able to fund over 230 units of permanent affordable housing and keep the operations going for many years to come. So again, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that this tool can be a huge, powerful tool if the collective wants to come together and actually enact it.
You know, 2 points. One, to piggyback off what you said, we have several years ago, a bunch of new houses were built along a street called 18th Street. It looks like a ghetto now. Because I could have envisioned if that had been done under the control of a community land trust. That would be a beautiful strip, but it wasn't done that way. Community had no voice in what kind of housing was going to be built, whether or not people in the community could afford those houses or even want to buy those houses. That's one. Two, the thing I love about community land trust is more about housing and it's more about land. In order to attract people to come to your neighborhood or stay in your neighborhood, you've got to be able to create jobs for the teens, for the young adults, and even jobs for the seniors. And there are entities that provide employment for those three groups of people. You want to be able to work in your community, you want to live in your community, you want to be able to play in your community. And so those things have to also be in place. The good thing about what's happening in Russell now, or why this is such a ripe opportunity for a community land trust now, is because of guilt and because of this whole movement of social justice and racial equality or equity. So this is a great opportunity for us to do this. We need to take advantage of it. Lastly, there's already development starting. There's already people who have their eyes on this community. So a lot of planning has already been done. Research has been done. Studies have been done. Yes.
So there are a couple organizations in Russell that hold a lot of houses and a lot of land. If you pair the research, the guilt, and the influence of a CLT, you can shift those who hold those houses that they're just holding on to for no reason other than waiting for market values to start to loosen up that grip and to really get the community into those houses and the CLT to own that land.
To your point about new housing going up and unfortunately it deteriorating over time, the community can't embrace something if they weren't involved in the idea of it, in the production of it. And that's the beautiful thing about this community land trust. You know, I've gone into certain community land trusts that go all the way down to the idea of, hey, we're coming with some templates of housing layouts. let us as a community figure out what's the best design. You know, we may need bedroom sizes a little bit larger than some of the other cookie cutter sort of layouts that are out there. But again, you allow for that one, you allow for the capacity building of first bringing in the skills and the training for residents to be able to productively go through those processes, as what Justin said about sort of community planning. You want to make sure that your residents are ready, because a lot of times our communities are primarily given pretty pictures and says to folks, hey, you like the pictures, right? And it's like, no, the heck with the pictures. I want to know what the slope on that house that's in back of Kevin is. I want to know that that dormer doesn't look right in our community. I want that changed. I want this bedroom closet to be double the size, because I know that, folks have a lot of clothes. I want, these things. And you allow the community to put together these designs. And then during the development process, of course, we're not going to be able to design stuff that's going to be way too expensive, but you don't make that decision. You bring it back to the community and you say to the community, listen, we can only get X amount of thousands of dollars into this house. We got to cut something. What should we cut? But again, and I harken back to what Justin said, us as staff or as professionals, we shouldn't be decision makers on that. What we should do is we should come up with different options and hand them to folks and be like, hey, you guys decide. Is it the bigger bedroom you want? Or is it the huge walk-in closet that you want? Unfortunately, the budget can't handle both of them. But again, you allow for those decisions to happen on a community level. And then once those decisions are made on a community level, then you have community start to embrace when it goes into construction. You start to have community members walk by because they start to take pride into being like, hey, I helped design that house. Or, hey, I'm talking to one of my friends, hey, do you want a new house? Because I know the perfect place for you, and I actually helped design it. I mean, it's that sense of pride that this community land trust effort can be brought into a community where, again, this collective community starts looking out for its own assets.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jason, about that pride, that collective conversations that have to happen. We have a lot of questions from Facebook about decision making, about cooperatives. So I'm gonna get started. We're a little ahead of schedule, but we have a lot of great questions. So I'm gonna just start there because I think that can build onto the conversation that you were just having, making those decisions and being involved in how that happens. I'm gonna go to the very first question. I'm just gonna go how they came and bunch them in how they see fit. Do members have to pay a fee? I guess a fee for being a part of the community land trust? And the other question with that is, how does the homeowner make money if when they sell it at a similar price they bought it? How do they make money? And do they have to pay a fee to be a member of the community land trust?
Great questions. And I would say that for the membership fee, it is up to the community to make that decision. I have some community land trusts that say, yeah, there's a $5 membership fee or whatever you can bring to the table. It's not about the monetary value. It's about the collectiveness of you buying in to the idea that you want to be a part of this collective. So that's what, the fee I think can easily be sort of talked about and figured out, but there is usually a very nominal fee. To the idea of making money on sort of housing, and I think this is where we've talked about sort of generational wealth. And one of the things that we know is that folks don't just build wealth because they bought a home. They build wealth because they can retain the home through generations. And that's something that, again, the leadership team of this new CLT will talk through what we consider to be resale formulas. And again, it's sort of going through some mathematical, formulas to say what is an appropriate appreciation return that we can give to these homeowners that have lived in these homes without making the home unaffordable. So for instance, we usually run before I go into that, I want to also be very clear that in a community land trust, you get 100% of the equity that you pay every month to pay down your mortgage. What the community land trust wants to, balance is this idea of appreciation. What the market can bear or what the market can go for of a home versus what the affordability of the actual unit is. So a lot of times we see right now for a family that has put down about $1,000 and has lived in their home for like 6 years. We've done a national study that looked at 30 years of transactions of CLT home ownership, and that family makes about $14,000 to $15,000 in equity. Now, the appreciation part is a little bit different because it's all about where the market is compared to where the affordability is in your community. But let me make this clear. There has been not one of the 275 CLTs that has ever let a homeowner sell a home and lose money. So you will walk away with a fair return, but you will not walk away with, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's very important to say to folks is, one, community land trust home ownership is not for everybody. What the community land trust home ownership is going to do is put folks that have probably are not able to get into home ownership because of the subsidy that we're going to be able to bring to the deal. So when I run and I think about scenarios of Louisville, I think about bringing about $150,000, maybe $175,000 worth of subsidy into a housing deal to make it so that it's affordable for a family.
Yeah, so to provide some local context on that question, here in Lexington, for the membership aspect of it, residents in the community pay nothing in membership dues. They are automatically members of the organization and have full voting rights in the organization. On the individual wealth creation, one of the things that was brought up with Markham, that community there on 14th Street, I believe you said, just building those houses that then quickly, fell into disrepair. With the community land trust model, one of the words that we use most often is stewardship. The CLT is there to steward not only the subsidy from the governmental side of things, but the home itself as a community asset. And so we're really there to stand behind the homeowners, create that pride in home ownership that we were talking about earlier, where the house is physically responsive to the community, so that there can be a pride in home ownership. We're there to implement post-purchase education so that the house doesn't fall into disrepair. And then if it begins to, work with the homeowner to say, what can we do to support you in getting it back on track? I've written individual grants for some of our homeowners to make their home more adaptable, to make their home, to make improvements on their home, just so that, again, it doesn't fall into a history of disrepair. And so this way, the CLT is really there to stand behind that homeowner and steward it in the long term, which in and of itself creates an even higher appreciation level than a market rate home that was sold at the same general price level that falls into disrepair. And so, with the subsidy going into this home, here in Lexington, we're putting A decent chunk of change in subsidy, anywhere from $75,000 to $125,000 in subsidy to get these homes to an affordable price, especially right now with lumber prices and construction prices. And so we're really looking at it from the sense of, it might be a $225,000 home that someone's purchasing for $115,000. And that in and of itself, the systems are all new HVAC, the roof has a 30-year warranty on it. All of these things that go into the creation of that long-term asset that's able to appreciate, even though we limit the appreciation upon resale based on the appraisal. We're just seeing, because the homes are so well built with the community land trust model and so well taken care of, that homeowners are truly building wealth through that appreciation, even though it is limited by that formula.
So, and I think there's a couple important things that need to be restated. Residents make that decision on what the formula is on resale. Residents also make the decision on what's value that home, who should be in that home, what economic status they're at, right? So they're going to be advised by those technical advisors, but the residents are going to say that we're going to sell this house at folk who are 30% AMI or less. We're going to sell this house at 50% AMI or less, or we're going to sell this house at market rate. It will be the neighborhood that'll make that decision. And I think that needs to be continuously said, because there's another conversation that this CLT or this idea of a CLT is not resident-led. And we need to make sure that everybody understands that this is going to be resident-led.
Thank you for bringing that up, especially the two different structures of like how a CLT is modeled, and then also how those structures are coming together through resident voice and resident participation. That goes into another question. Is there a leadership role? This is from Facebook. Is there a leadership role, and or do the members of the CLT vote in order to weigh in on decision making? What is the decision making processes that you all know of in the model of CLT?
Yeah, so I mean, some of it is, and hate to continue to repeat, it is up to the community. I mean, I've seen communities that sort of be like, hey, we're going to go through majority. The majority sort of, wins out the vote. I've seen sort of some community CLTs that are like, no, we got to strive for consensus, and we're going to really make sure that we can get as many sort of, but again, it's such a flexible structure and tool that it can actually adapt to what the local community really feels is necessary. Like I have some CLTs that are saying, that are a little bit more expansive, that say, we're not just going to accept residents as our members, but also any businesses that are located within inside of our geographic area can also be a member of our organization and can actually vote. I have some CLTs that took the board structure and have said, hey, for these community seats, I want to make sure that I have a business there. I want to make sure that I have a youth member that's sort of, a part of that board. Again, it all depends on where the community wants to go.
Okay, let's get to this next. There's two good questions I want us to answer that we haven't really answered. One of them is, are there typically income limits to purchase property under a CLT? And not even just income, like, are there any limits, including income, maybe resident, like if you live there, if primary residency, are there any limits to purchase property under a CLT?
So this one's a little bit complicated, because sometimes CLTs are hampered by the money that they get for subsidy. So, so the money that comes in sometimes from government has some strings on it. But again, it's up to the community to decide, do we take this money or do we know where other money is that we can go ahead and use? Typically, most community land trusts work with families that are 80% of the median income and below. That is sort of usually the sweet spot where there is enough local and also federal money that you can leverage and you can actually get folks that political will to go ahead and give to your CLT. But I actually am working with a number of CLTs, like in Baltimore, that have just closed on giving families the opportunity at 30% of the area median income. So again, it's up to the community in terms of what spread of the area median income levels do they want to target. But a lot of times, some of the money will sort of say, you can't go beyond 80. We don't care what the floor is, but you can't go beyond 80% of the median income. To a question around residency, I have a few CLTs that have been very creative in how they sort of do the application process and how they can sort of prioritize folks in terms of giving certain preferences. Now, I say that with also the caveat that a lot of those decisions were also run by their local fair housing advocates to make sure that those advocates were on board with this idea. Because a lot of times, if you're going to get in trouble, it's usually from the advocates yelling at you, telling you, hey, wait a minute, fair housing, fair housing. But if you can get the advocates on board and actually have them be a part of that decision-making process, then a number of them will be like, yeah, no, we see this. And, to the point that was made earlier, when you got skin in the game, then you start sort of loosening up and be like, oh, yeah, no, I want this to be successful. Of course, we'll allow you to do that. You just got to do A, B, and C. So I think that there are definitely creative ways of making this work. I think the big thing is getting the leadership team together of the residents that want to move this forward, so then we can start digging into, hey, here are some of the different options. Where do you guys want to go? Here's what we've seen. Let's start at least laying the foundation.
Yeah, what we've seen here in Lexington, based on the funding, it's all at 80% AMI and below. But our community really wanted to prioritize different levels of housing accessibility for families. And so what we've been able to do, our average AMI is 64% in the community. Because if you look at it, you can build affordable housing for 80% AMI and below all day long. But if you're putting that into a community where the average AMI is 30%, that affordable housing itself is a gentrifying force. And so looking at it from the perspective of an anti-displacement organization, first, we give priority status to anyone who has original resident status in Davis Bottom. So they, in the application process, have a priority. Second, we are implementing different levels or different typologies of housing to meet the needs of different families. So single family homes, 80% AMI and below, our average is 64% AMI. Our next phase of development, we're looking at townhomes, which we can reduce the price even more on because of development costs are less. And so we're looking to hit at 50% AMI for the townhomes. And so again, just trying to match housing typology, match the subsidy, match the community needs to what we're able to develop as an organization. So it's really up to that community what their priorities are. For us, we were founded as an anti-displacement organization, so that's what we look at when we look at what AMI we want to be building for, when we look at what priorities are on our application. And so all these decisions along the way really get to the ethos of the organization itself and the decisions made by the community.
Thank you all. Thank you all for sharing that. And can I get one more question in? This is a great question because it kind of makes us think about renting and involving some rental properties into this. So there's a group called LACE, Louisville Association of Community Economics, and the Louisville Community Grocers are working to build cooperatives in disenfranchised areas. Presently, we're working to build a cooperative grocery store and then move into areas of cooperative apartments. However, we couldn't quite see how to control rising rent costs. CLTs sound like a great fit for cooperative apartment living, right? And that was the question, correct? And also just tying in like the rental properties, because I know I've seen some conversations that sometimes, homeownership is not needed in the community. What about renting?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've personally have developed 2 cooperatives on Community Land Trust, about 90 units of cooperative sort of housing. And cooperatives are great because they are sort of this, democratically sort of run, sort of hybrid of home ownership with sort of a rental sort of feel of not too much of a lift around the idea of taking care of the entire space of the envelope of the building, of sort of the grounds. So yeah, no, I mean, again, anything that you can think of around real estate or around housing models, you can put onto a community land trust. The big thing with the community land trust is you're transferring the decision-making to community residents, and you're primarily having a vehicle to keep it permanently affordable. Now, doing a cooperative, there's a lot of different funding mechanisms out there and trying to make sure that you have the right mix of AMIs. But the cooperative itself has one large shared mortgage that everybody through their monthly rents are going ahead and sort of paying down and taking care of some of the operating cost of it. So, and one of the good things that I see more and more is that I see more and more community land trust actually leveraging some of the other development tools out there, like low-income tax credit deals. Now, the great thing with a community land trust being a part of a low-income tax credit deal is that historically, without a community land trust, those deals are usually 15 years of affordability. You put a community land trust underneath it, and boy, you just did that forever. You got permanent now rental housing that's affordable. And that's something that we're seeing more and more. And 2 other CLTs, one in Buffalo, New York, the other one in Charleston, South Carolina, have both sort of relatively new startups, have both worked with tax credit developers that are seeing more and more this being an acceptable use in the tax credit program that's done by Treasury. So yeah, I mean, if the community's looking at, rentals, then I think that there's an opportunity there to, again, work with a developer, bring in some tax credits, make it permanently affordable. And again, the community itself will be there as the steward, as Justin talked about, to make sure that those rents don't go sky high year after year.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that real resourceful information. We're going to close this in. Does anybody have any last remarks they want to share with the community, with the people watching before we close this out? You don't have to.
Couple different things, right? I was trying to share Louisville's AMI levels because I did something that annoys me. I use an acronym that I know a lot of people don't know. and then I use a percentage on the acronym that, and when I first started this work, it annoyed me. So when we talk about 80% of AMI, we're talking about $50,000, $60,000. When we're talking about 30% of AMI, we're talking about under $30,000, right? I believe that Louisville's area median income right now is roughly $80,000. So, and I'm trying to break myself from that, but sometimes I can't catch myself. Also, reach out to me or Kevin if you want to talk about a CLT in Louisville. We will walk you through and talk for as long as it takes. At least I will. Kevin is extremely busy. He is extremely busy. I will put my email in the chat, and we can sit down and have a conversation about a CLT. I can answer all the questions that I know. For the ones that I can't know, I will email Jason because he's also extremely busy, and I will pass on those answers.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else have anything to share? I'm glad you mentioned that point. Okay, I'm sorry, Justin.
Oh, no problem. As Michael just alluded to, and Jason mentioned earlier, this is really not only a community in terms of the actual housing and neighborhood, but also the organizational communities. It's obvious from this conversation that there are so many interested parties, and in the chat, we've seen a lot of other organizations starting to reach out. And so really bringing all of this together, it's incredible. So thank you, first off, to RPOP and Cities United for having this conversation. I do want to say, so Lexington Community Land Trust, we were the first community land trust in the state of Kentucky. We are here. Yeah, a little humble brag. But we're here to be a resource for y'all. As folks have questions, we're always here to answer those. We've gone through sales, we've gone through refinances, and started conversations and gotten mortgages through Kentucky Housing Corporation. All of these steps that we can begin to translate over to Louisville, because we feel like we would be stronger as an organization with a partner 90 miles away. And so we are excited for the development of a Louisville Community Land Trust. And so, I'll drop my email in the chat as well, and definitely look forward to continuing these conversations. We're here to be a resource and lean on us as much or as little as you want.
Thank you, Justin.
So my last thought is that everyone knows sort of in the news and what's happening on the federal level that we may be getting a once in a generation sort of investment into housing, into some social services. It would be amazing if we can take that once in a generation investment and make it work for generations to come, instead of putting it into some programs that have a very short, lifespan to them, but put some of that investment into the community and actually have the community be the decision maker would be profound. So I think now is the time. As you hear from the panelists, you got a number of great partners that are ready to go, because Grounded Solutions is ready. We're making a commitment to your city to be here for as long as it takes and to be as useful as we can be. So want to thank you guys for allowing us the time to share some of these lessons learned, and I look forward to the ongoing conversations as well.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for always being committed, always being there to be able to have these conversations. Mr. Markham.
I would just like to thank RPOP for having this conversation. I think we can make this happen as a community. This is the time is right. This is the perfect storm, and it's been said, this is a once in a generation opportunity. And I thank you all for having this conversation, and for everybody that's participated in this series.
All right. Well, that's that. This is just us inviting you all for the follow-up conversation in person. We're going to have it at Joshua Tabernacle Baptist Church on 15th Street in the Russell community, June 29th at 6 p.m. We will have food. We will have play cousins. So bring the kids, bring your lawn chairs. We're going to continue this conversation. We will have those unanswered questions answered with responses. And we will be in community and continue to talk about what we need in our community and the potential of the Community Land Trust. So come out and join us on the 29th. And yeah, enjoy your evening, everybody. Thank you to our partners and everybody on the panel. And y'all have a good evening.